Chosen one, something has shifted. The season of waiting has reached its edge, and what begins now is not another promise hanging somewhere in the future. It is a decision that has already been set into motion long before you could see evidence of it. For a long time, your life has felt like a proving ground, a place where your faith was tested in ways few people around you ever fully understood. And I want you to hear this clearly. You did more than endure that season. You came through it transformed. Like gold that remains in the fire long enough to become pure, you stayed present when everything in you wanted relief. You kept holding on to what you believed, even when your circumstances gave you no reason to expect good news.
God saw what that cost you.
He saw the mornings when you stared at the ceiling before getting out of bed because you were already tired of carrying the weight of another day. He saw the moment you checked your account balance and immediately looked away because you already knew what you would find. He saw the prayers whispered in quiet rooms, the nights you sat alone with questions you could not answer, and the growing distance between what you hoped for and what your life seemed to reflect. That distance is closing now. The season of planting without visible results is reaching completion, and a season of visible return is beginning to emerge. Beneath the surface, foundations have been forming for longer than you realize. What is being rebuilt in your life is deeper than circumstances. It reaches into the structure of your future itself. Before we go further, notice what is happening inside you as you hear this. There is a quiet recognition rising, something deeper than agreement. Maybe you cannot explain it fully, but something in you feels strangely familiar with these words. Trust that feeling. It is the part of you that recognizes movement before your mind can measure it. Because there have been signs, not random events, not meaningless experiences. Signs that have been speaking through your body, your emotions, your relationships, and the moments you almost dismissed. They have been telling a story long before external proof arrived. The first sign often appears in sleep. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. The room is dark. The clock glows from across the room. 3:17, 4:11, sometimes the same hour night after night. Everyone else is asleep, yet your mind feels unusually awake, unusually clear, as though something is quietly calling your attention. In those moments, there is often a stillness that feels different from ordinary insomnia. It feels like standing near the edge of an answer you cannot quite see yet. What is happening is not simply interruption, it is preparation. The version of you required for what is coming is becoming more alert, more aware, more ready to recognize what arrives. The second sign shows up in the body. A heaviness in your chest that seems to appear from nowhere. Tension across your shoulders that follows you through the day. The feeling that you are carrying something invisible, something difficult to explain to anyone else. Most people call it stress and move on. But for many chosen ones, it feels deeper than that. The weight you've been carrying has felt real because it is real. It is the pressure of a life stretching toward something larger than what it currently sees. There were days when you looked perfectly fine on the outside, while privately wondering why everything felt so heavy. What is approaching carries significance, and significance often announces itself before it becomes visible. The third sign arrives through emotion. You could be doing something ordinary when suddenly a wave rises inside you. Not quite sadness, not tied to a specific memory, just a deep release that seems to come from somewhere beneath the surface. Sometimes it arrives as tears. Sometimes it arrives as a long breath you did not know you were holding. What makes these moments powerful is that they often appear after years of staying strong. People admired your strength while you quietly grew exhausted from carrying it. These emotional releases are not weakness. They are space being made. They are the heart letting go of what it no longer needs to hold, so it can receive what comes next. The fourth sign has been unfolding in your relationships and familiar environments. Places that once felt comfortable no longer fit the same way. Conversations that once energized you now leave you drained. Certain connections begin to feel complete, even when nothing dramatic has happened between you. This can be confusing because it often feels like loss before it feels like growth. But what is happening is expansion. You have outgrown rooms that once helped shape you. The discomfort is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that something within you has become larger than the space that once contained it. The fifth sign is quiet, yet remarkably precise. Timing begins to behave differently. The right conversation appears exactly when you need it. Someone says something they could not possibly know you needed to hear. One door closes, and almost immediately another opens in a way that feels strangely coordinated. There comes a point when coincidence no longer feels like a sufficient explanation. The connections become too exact. The timing becomes too precise. It starts to feel as though invisible pieces have been moving into place for longer than you realized. And there is something else almost nobody notices at first. The resistance often becomes strongest right before the shift arrives. The confusion deepens, the questions become louder. Yet beneath all of it, another reality is unfolding. The path you are walking has not been forgotten. The one who placed you on it is still arranging what comes next, and the evidence of that arrangement is already appearing around you. 5 signs. And if you are honest with yourself, you probably recognized more than one. Not because you were searching for confirmation, but because something inside you already knew. The recognition you felt was deeper than agreement. It was the feeling of hearing your own story spoken out loud by someone who should not have known it. The signs have been real. The shift they point toward is real. But before we talk about what is arriving, we need to talk about what was happening during the season that felt like nothing was moving. Because that season was never just about waiting. It was building something inside you, and the things it was building could never have been formed in comfort. There is a woman in Scripture whose story belongs here. Her name is Ruth. Her life had been stripped down to almost nothing. The future she expected was gone, the people she relied on were gone, and she found herself standing between what was familiar and a road that offered no guarantees. Most people would have chosen certainty. Ruth chose faithfulness. She stayed committed when commitment offered no visible reward. When she spoke those famous words, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay," she was not making a strategic decision. She was revealing the kind of person she had become through loss. She entered a land that felt unfamiliar and began again from the bottom. Day after day, under a foreign sun, she bent down to gather what others had left behind. No audience, no applause, no evidence that her life was moving toward anything greater. Just quiet faithfulness repeated one ordinary day at a time. And that is the part many people miss. The breakthrough did not begin when she was noticed. It began long before that, when she kept showing up despite having every reason to quit. She brought her full heart to small assignments. She honored the season she was in, even when it looked nothing like the season she hoped for. Then one day, everything changed. The owner of the field saw her, not because she forced the moment, not because she manipulated the outcome. The provision she needed found her where faithfulness had planted her. And when he spoke, his words carried recognition before they carried blessing. In essence, he said, "I know what it cost you to stay. I know what you lost. I know how many times leaving would have been easier. And because of that, what belongs to me is now open to you." In a single moment, doors that had remained closed began to open. The season of barely getting by gave way to a season of covering, belonging, and provision. You are closer to Ruth's story than you realize. You have been working in places that were never your final destination. You have been making the most of small opportunities while carrying responsibilities that nobody fully understood. There were seasons when you gave far more than you received, And still you chose to remain a person of integrity. There were days when you smiled through conversations while privately wondering how much longer you could keep going. Days when you answered messages hours later because even simple interactions felt heavy. Days when you questioned whether your turn would ever come. Yet somehow, you stayed. And that matters more than you know. Because the one who placed purpose inside you has seen every unseen act of faithfulness. Nothing has been overlooked. Nothing has been wasted. The preparation was costly because what it was preparing you for carries weight. Most of what was happening could not be seen while it was happening. That is the nature of deep formation. Roots do not grow in sunlight, they grow in hidden places. While you were focused on the pressure above ground, something underneath was becoming strong enough to support what comes next. Let me tell you what was actually being built in you. The first thing the wilderness formed was trust. Not the kind that depends on favorable circumstances, but the kind that remains steady when circumstances offer nothing to hold on to. There were seasons when you received no visible confirmation, no clear evidence, no immediate answers. Yet you kept moving forward anyway. The hardest part was never the delay itself. The hardest part was watching yourself slowly stop expecting good news. It was learning how to live with unanswered questions. It was continuing to believe while carrying the ache of uncertainty. What emerged from that season is a trust that no longer depends on constant reassurance. That kind of trust is rare. It cannot be borrowed from someone else's story. It can only be forged through experience, and you have lived through enough to know the difference between hopeful optimism and something much deeper. What lives in you now has survived real storms. The second thing the wilderness built was humility. Not performance, not pretending, but genuine openness. There is a kind of surrender that only develops after years of trying to hold everything together yourself. Eventually, something softens. The grip loosens. The need to control every outcome begins to fade. You have lived through that process. Little by little, the hands that once closed around disappointment began to open again. That openness matters because provision often arrives through doors you never planned for, through people you never expected, through paths you never would have designed yourself. The wilderness taught you how to receive. It taught you that open hands can hold far more than clenched fists ever could. And that lesson is becoming important now. The third quality is harder to describe, but it may be the most valuable of all. The wilderness taught you how to carry weight without abandoning your purpose. It taught you how to keep showing up when the story gave you no preview of its ending. It taught you how to continue investing effort long before any visible return appeared. You became someone who stayed, someone who returned to the work, someone who kept turning pages even when the chapter you were living through felt painfully unfinished. Many people never develop that capacity, yet it is exactly the quality required for the season ahead. The difficulty was never proof that you were failing, it was evidence of what you were capable of carrying, and you carried it. Take a moment and breathe here. Let yourself recognize what has actually been accomplished inside you. Not everything valuable in your life can be measured by what appeared around you. Some of the most important victories happened where nobody could see them. What was built in you during that season was not small. It became the foundation beneath everything that is now beginning to emerge. You may not have realized it while it was happening, but you were laying the groundwork for a future strong enough to hold what is coming. And that is what real faithfulness does. It keeps building long before the results become visible. There is a name I want to place into this moment with you. An ancient name, carried through generations because of what it revealed about the heart of God. The name is Jehovah Jireh. It first appeared on a mountain where Abraham faced what looked like the end of everything he had hoped for. He climbed carrying a burden that cannot be measured with ordinary language. Every step brought him closer to a moment he never wanted to face. Yet at the exact point where the need became absolute, provision appeared.
Not before the tension, not while the outcome still felt manageable. At the moment when there was nothing left to rely on except trust. Abraham named that place Jehovah-Jireh, often translated as "the Lord will provide." But the deeper meaning reaches further than provision alone. The Hebrew root carries the idea of seeing fully, seeing into a situation rather than simply looking at it from a distance. God has been looking into your life that way. He has seen more than the surface details of your need. He has seen the years behind it, the private disappointments, the silent prayers, the moments you smiled in public while privately wondering how much longer you could keep carrying what nobody else could see. He sees not only where you are, but what complete restoration actually requires. And that matters because Jehovah-Jireh does not operate from scarcity. He does not respond only to the immediate symptom. He responds to the deeper story. What is unfolding now reaches into multiple areas of your life at once. The first area being rearranged is your relationships. Some connections were necessary for a previous version of you. They helped shape you, teach you, stretch you, and prepare you. But preparation seasons eventually end, and relationships that once fit naturally can begin to feel strangely out of alignment. You may have already noticed it. Certain conversations leave you tired instead of energized. Certain environments feel smaller than they used to. People you genuinely care about no longer seem able to walk with you into the place your life is moving toward. This is not punishment, rejection, or failure. It is alignment. And what is remarkable is that the grief may feel lighter than you expect,
because the spaces being created are not remaining empty. New connections are approaching, people who feel less like strangers and more like familiar souls you somehow recognize before you fully know them. God is reorganizing the relational architecture of your life to support the future He has already begun building. The second area being reorganized is your sense of purpose. For a long time there has been a quiet question sitting beneath your daily routines. Am I building something real? Is any of this actually leading somewhere? The uncertainty has been exhausting, not because you lacked effort, but because you lacked visibility. You kept moving while carrying questions nobody could answer for you. That fog is beginning to lift,
not because every answer is about to arrive at once,
but because clarity rarely arrives that way. Clarity comes through movement. It unfolds like a road at sunrise. You do not need to see the entire journey. You only need enough light for the next step, and then the next. The direction you have been asking for is already beginning to reveal itself. There is something important connected to this that I want you to hold in the back of your mind. We will return to it shortly. But first, I need you to understand something researchers have discovered about breakthrough itself. For years, scientists studying human performance have examined what happens when a person finally moves beyond survival mode and begins operating closer to their true potential. One neurologist spent decades studying this exact transition.
What they found is fascinating.
During genuine breakthrough, the brain begins functioning differently. Parts that once worked together naturally in childhood but gradually drifted apart under the weight of stress, disappointment, responsibility, and survival start reconnecting. And when that reconnection happens, something shifts. People become more aware of opportunities they once overlooked. They recognize patterns more clearly. They respond instead of react. The noise that has been crowding their inner world begins to quiet, making room for signals that were always present but difficult to hear. A doctor eventually developed a way to support that process, and I will come back to that in a moment. But first, there is one more part of your story that needs to be named. The third area being reorganized is the one many chosen ones have carried the deepest concern about: the financial ground beneath their lives.
I want to speak carefully here. This is not about predicting numbers. It is about structure.
It is about what happens when provision reaches a life that has been prepared to carry it. God does not build a future through barely enough. He does not simply patch a problem and move on. When Jehovah Jireh releases provision, he addresses foundations. There is an ancient Hebrew word that captures this beautifully: shalom. Many people know the related word shalom and associate it with peace, but shalom reaches further. It speaks of completeness, restoration, wholeness, the condition of having nothing missing and nothing broken. In ancient legal language, it could also describe repayment that exceeded what was lost. Not merely restoration to the previous level, but restoration that accounted for the damage caused by the loss itself. And if you are honest, there are things you have been missing for longer than you should have. Not only money, peace, stability, confidence in the future, the ability to plan ahead without fear, the feeling that life is moving instead of standing still. Shalom speaks directly to those places. It acknowledges that the years mattered, that the losses were real, that the waiting cost something. And it speaks of a restoration that fully recognizes what those years carried. You are entering a season of shalom, and shalom is deeper than comfort. Comfort can be temporary, shalom is completeness. But before completeness can fully settle into your life, there is something we need to address. Most messages about provision avoid this part, even though it often determines how fully a person can receive what is being offered. There is a fear that develops in people who have waited a very long time, and surprisingly, it is often not the fear that nothing will change. It is the fear that everything will. Sit with that for a moment, because after years of waiting, struggle becomes familiar. Delay becomes familiar. The identity built around surviving becomes familiar. You learn how to be the person who keeps believing without seeing. But what happens when the thing you have been waiting for finally arrives? What happens when the prayer is answered? What happens when the door actually opens? Something inside has to reorganize. The person who spent years carrying hope through uncertainty must now become the person willing to receive. And sometimes that transition feels more vulnerable than the waiting itself. Because receiving asks you to release old defenses, old expectations, and old stories about who you are. The faithful one who waited is becoming the one who receives. And that shift is larger than most people realize. And that shift is not always as easy as people imagine. When someone has spent years waiting, hoping, surviving, and adjusting to disappointment, receiving can feel surprisingly vulnerable. Waiting creates its own identity. You learn how to be the person who expects delays, the person who braces for setbacks, the person who keeps a little distance between their heart and their expectations so the next disappointment hurts less. Beneath that is something even deeper, not a dramatic wound from one terrible moment, but a quiet story that formed over time. A story built from years when what you believed would happen and what actually happened seemed far apart. A story that slowly taught you to lower your expectations in order to protect yourself. Maybe you've heard that voice before. Maybe it whispered that opportunities seem to work better for other people. Maybe it suggested that the promise somehow applies more fully to everyone else. Maybe it convinced you that the gap between what you hoped for and what arrived was saying something about your worth. The mind becomes very good at creating these conclusions, not because they are true, but because they feel safer than continuing to hope. After enough disappointment, doubt can start sounding like wisdom. But I want to speak directly to that place inside you. You are not behind because you are less valuable. You are not overlooked. You are not the one exception to the provision you have spent years believing in. The waiting was never evidence that you were small. It was evidence that what was being prepared carried weight. The truth is that large things often require deep foundations. What carries greater impact usually demands greater preparation. Long waiting is not proof of low value. More often, it is proof of higher stakes. You are allowed to release the story that made you smaller than you really are. You are allowed to stop apologizing for the things you genuinely needed. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that learned to survive on less than what your heart was made for. And you are allowed to receive what was built for the person you have become. The years of lack taught you important lessons, but those years do not deserve your lifelong loyalty. That chapter is complete. You passed through it. Now let me return to something I mentioned earlier. I told you about a neurologist who spent more than 2 decades studying what happens inside the brain during breakthrough moments. His name is Dr. Daniel Barron, and his work builds upon discoveries made by Nobel Prize-winning neuroscientist Dr. Roger Sperry. Dr. Sperry demonstrated that the 2 hemispheres of the brain are designed to work together in full synchronization. When that happens, the brain functions at a remarkably different level. Children naturally operate this way. Studies suggest that the vast majority of young children display this highly integrated state before years of stress, survival patterns, and conditioning gradually weaken that connection. As adults, many people spend years functioning below their natural capacity without realizing it. Think about it. There was a time when creativity came more easily. Curiosity came more easily. New possibilities felt natural instead of exhausting. Over time, responsibility, disappointment, pressure, and survival instincts slowly narrowed that openness. Dr. Barron became fascinated by that process and began searching for a way to help restore the synchronization that many people lose. Let me tell you about one woman who experienced the result. She grew up believing her family was trapped in a pattern that could never be broken. For years, she heard stories that reinforced the same message. Her father spent decades working toward a promotion, finally received it, and then watched the company collapse almost immediately afterward. The family came to see setbacks as something inherited, almost expected. Then something changed. After several months of using the system Dr. Barron developed, opportunities began appearing in unexpected places. She received a promotion she had not even been pursuing. Relationships that had felt fractured for years began healing. The pattern she had accepted as permanent started losing its grip. What stood out most was not the practical results. It was the way she described them. She looked at her family and said, "I think the family curse is gone." What she had interpreted as a curse was, in many ways, a life spent operating from stress, disconnection, and survival mode. As her brain became more integrated, she found herself recognizing opportunities more quickly, responding with greater clarity, and receiving possibilities she previously struggled to see. The system Dr. Barron created is called the Genius Switch. It is an 8-minute audio sequence designed to support neural synchronization between both hemispheres of the brain. It is not a meditation app, not a complicated machine, and not a program that requires hours of effort. The process is simple. Put on headphones, listen, and allow the audio technology to do the work it was designed to do. What makes it compelling is its simplicity. Just 8 minutes a day. No affirmations to memorize, no lengthy routines, no complicated techniques. Simply creating the conditions for the brain to operate closer to the way it was originally designed to function. Of course, it is not for everyone. Many people will hear about it and move on. Many have become comfortable operating at a fraction of what they are capable of. But if you are still here, if something inside you keeps searching for the missing piece, if you have spent years sensing that there is more available to you than what you've experienced so far, then this may resonate differently. According to the team behind the program, professionals who reviewed the technology believed it could have justified a much higher price point. Comparable neurofeedback systems often cost thousands of dollars, and specialized sessions can cost hundreds per visit. The Genius Switch is currently being offered for $39 through this presentation, reduced from its regular price. Included are several additional resources designed to support different areas of personal growth, including guided visualization exercises, nutritional guidance, a classic abundance text, and a practical habits guide. Everything is backed by a full money-back guarantee. If the experience does not create meaningful value for you, you are not expected to keep it. Dr. Barron and his team stand behind their work completely. Before you go looking for alternatives, there is something worth understanding. Many recordings carry similar labels and make similar promises, but according to Dr. Barron's team, most do not contain the synchronization technology they claim to use. The original sequence developed from this research is available only through the source he personally explains and supports. But for a moment I want to move beyond the tool and speak directly to you. Not to the version of you that spent years waiting, not to the version that learned how to survive disappointment. I want to speak to the version of you that is beginning to emerge now. The version that has been quietly growing beneath the surface while life seemed unchanged. Because there is a part of you that has been waiting a very long time to hear this. You are a cycle breaker. Not because you are perfect, not because you are stronger than everyone who came before you, but because you were willing to carry questions, burdens, and responsibilities that previous generations never fully resolved. Somewhere along the way, you became the person standing at a turning point in a much larger story. The patterns of almost, the patterns of nearly, the patterns of always getting close but never quite arriving. Those patterns lose their authority with you, and the impact reaches further than you realize. What enters your life does not stop with you. The healing, the provision, the wisdom, the stability, the opportunities, these things flow outward. They touch people connected to you now and people whose names you may never know. The choices you are making today are already shaping futures you cannot yet see. That is why the wilderness mattered. It was never only about getting through difficulty. It was about becoming the kind of person who could carry what comes next without being crushed by it. You were being built long before anything visible appeared. You are a builder. Not first of businesses, projects, careers, or accomplishments. You are a builder of invisible things. Trust, character, integrity, patience, wisdom earned through experience rather than theory. The strongest structures are built by people who understand pressure because they have lived beneath it. They know the value of foundations because they spent years becoming one. And there is something else you became along the way. You became a voice. Not the loudest voice, not the most polished voice, but a voice with credibility that only experience can create. There are things you understand now because you lived them. There are conversations you can have because you survived them. You know what it feels like to keep showing up when motivation is gone. You know what it feels like to smile while carrying private battles nobody else can see. You know what it feels like to wonder whether your efforts matter and then choose faithfulness anyway. That experience became a language, and in the season ahead, people will recognize something in you that cannot be taught from books or borrowed from someone else's testimony. They will hear truth because it was forged in real life. Now let me leave you with the truth sitting underneath everything we have talked about today. God does not waste what He allows. Slow down enough to let that settle, because it is easy to hear those words and move past them. It is harder to let them reach the places inside you that still carry disappointment, the places that still wonder why certain chapters had to happen the way they did. Every season that felt empty was accomplishing something hidden. Every delay was building something beneath the surface. Every prayer that seemed unanswered was connected to an answer that required more preparation than you could see at the time. And every closed door carried a purpose beyond the disappointment it created. There were opportunities that could not safely hold the person you were still becoming. Some doors stayed closed because the foundation underneath you was still being strengthened. This is the heart of Shalom. Not simply getting back what was lost, not merely recovering. Shalom speaks of restoration so complete that the story itself is redeemed. It acknowledges the loss while also accounting for it. It restores with fullness. Because what was taken from you was never only financial. Some of it was peace. Some of it was confidence. Some of it was time. Some of it was the simple ability to look ahead and feel hopeful. Shalom reaches into those places too. You are entering a season that values completeness more than comfort. And completeness lasts far longer than temporary relief. Let me tell you about someone whose story reflects that truth. A person experienced a sudden financial collapse that seemed to come out of nowhere. One conversation ended the very contract their family had relied upon for years. Overnight, the ground beneath them shifted, and the pressure that followed was immediate. Most people would have responded with panic. Instead, they became quiet. They stepped away from constant visibility, stepped away from the pressure to explain everything, and entered a season of prayer, reflection, and realignment. From the outside, it looked as though nothing productive was happening, but some of the most important work in life happens where nobody can see it. For 40 days, they carried the situation privately. They did not turn it into a performance. They held it before God. Then something unexpected happened. On the 38th day, a phone call arrived from a company they had never contacted. The opportunity came through a chain of events so unlikely that it felt orchestrated, and the contract offered was worth more than twice what had been lost. Not recovery, restoration, not replacement. Shalom. Later they described it this way: the silence was not empty. The silence was a field. Their faithfulness became the seed, and the harvest arrived when the season was complete. And perhaps that is speaking to you right now, because there have been things you carried privately, conversations you never had, fears you never posted about, nights when you sat alone with questions you could not explain to anyone else. That silence was not wasted. It was a field, and what was planted there is beginning to rise. As we draw all of this together, remember what has been revealed throughout this message. You came here carrying the weight of a long season. Financial pressure, emotional fatigue, relationship shifts, questions about whether the promise was truly meant for you, and the signs you have been experiencing are real. The nights when sleep felt different, the heaviness that settled into your body without a clear explanation, the unexpected emotional releases, the growing sense that certain places and relationships no longer fit, and those moments of timing so precise they felt impossible to dismiss. None of those experiences appeared by accident. They have been pointing toward something that is already beginning to unfold. None of these things are signs that something is wrong with you. The restless nights, the heaviness you've carried, the emotional waves that seem to come from nowhere, the growing sense that certain places no longer fit. These are not symptoms of failure. They are signs of emergence. They are evidence that something has been forming beneath the surface for longer than you realized. What the wilderness built in you was real. It built trust that survived unanswered questions. It built humility that opened your hands after years of trying to hold everything together alone. It built the strength of someone who remained faithful when walking away would have been easier. Those qualities matter because they are not merely signs of endurance. They are the qualities of someone prepared to carry what is coming next. The word over your life is still Jehovah Jireh, the God who sees beyond the immediate need, the God who sees the whole story at once, the God who understands not only what is missing, but what complete restoration requires. And the provision being released is shalom, wholeness, completeness, nothing missing, nothing broken. Not a partial answer, not a temporary fix. A restoration that reaches into every year that seemed lost and acknowledges what those years cost. Before we go further, take a breath, a real one. Not to receive anything, not to figure anything out, just to recognize something simple and powerful. You are still here. After everything you carried, everything you questioned, everything you survived, you are still standing. You are still breathing. That alone deserves a moment of gratitude. Now listen carefully, not to the voice of judgment, not to the voice that keeps asking whether you have done enough. Listen instead to the voice of a father whose decision has already been made. And this is what I sense being spoken over your life. I saw every moment. I was present in every room where you felt forgotten. I was there during the nights when you sat alone looking at numbers that refused to work, wondering how you were going to make it through another month. I was there in the car rides where you drove in silence because you did not have the energy to explain what you were feeling. I was there on the mornings when the weight arrived before your feet touched the floor. I was there when you answered people with a smile while carrying questions you never spoke out loud. I was there during the prayers that felt unanswered. Every one of them reached me. And what was being built through those moments is larger than you have allowed yourself to imagine. You are not waiting for approval. You are not waiting to become worthy. You are not waiting for one final test. The provision has already been released. Your assignment is no longer endurance. Your assignment is receiving. So, receive. Receive the relationships that are aligning with who you have become. Receive the clarity that is beginning to replace confusion. Receive the opportunities that are finding their way toward you. Receive the restoration of your ability to recognize what belongs in your life and respond when it arrives. Receive the shalom. Receive the peace. Receive the restoration. Receive the years that seemed lost being woven into something meaningful. Receive completeness. And remember this. The genius switch is not presented as a shortcut or a miracle solution. It is a simple daily practice designed to help restore capacities that many people naturally expressed in childhood before years of stress, survival, and pressure interrupted them. 8 minutes a day, a small window of time dedicated to helping your mind operate with greater clarity, awareness, and connection. Because if there has always been more inside you than what your current circumstances reflect, then restoring access to that potential matters. And now let me remind you of something important. You are a chosen one. You made it through. The season tested you, and you remained standing. The chapter challenged you, and you kept turning the page. The wilderness demanded more from you than most people will ever understand. And still you stayed. That matters. Because the one who allowed the preparation is the same one who holds the provision on the other side of it. So if this message reached a place inside you today, if something softened, if something finally exhaled, if a part of you recognized these words before your mind fully understood them, leave one word in the comments. Funded. Write it for yourself. Write it as a marker of this moment. Write it for the person who may read it later and realize they are not alone in their own season of waiting. And if this message gave you something meaningful, leave a like, not as an obligation, but as a simple signal that something real connected here. Those signals help messages like this reach people who are carrying the same questions, the same exhaustion, and the same hope you may have carried when you arrived. And if you feel called to stay, stay. Because this is not the end of the conversation. There is more ahead for the season you are entering. More clarity, more growth, more understanding of what has been unfolding beneath the surface all along. You belong among people who are becoming who they were always meant to be. This message is complete, but what has begun inside you is still unfolding. Go forward carrying the fullness of what has been spoken here. Go in shalom. Go in wholeness. Go funded.